All right. Hey, welcome back. Today we are going to be going through the basics of Tor. This is going to be for home users. If you've never used Tor before, you will have a pretty good understanding of it by the end of this video. You've probably noticed that I've got a little bit of soft lighting going on compared to my other videos. It's pretty late at night that I'm getting this recorded, but I wanted to get this one done because next video we are moving into Unix, which is, in my opinion, one of the best Linux distros that's out there for privacy. The thing is you have to have a pretty decent understanding of Tor to really understand what's going on with Unix. So that's why I wanted to get this video done first. Then we'll be moving into that one. That said, we've got a fair amount of material to cover, and then we're going to open up the Tor browser, and I'm going to go through some of the settings and best practices with it. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, or as is applicable with this video, I will have a guide, like the notes that I've been doing for the last couple of videos. I will have Tor notes. They'll be down in the description, down in the comment section below, that you can go pull those up and look at those as well if you would like. So let's go ahead and get started with Tor. Let me just explain the nested encryption real quick, and then we'll go through how this works, because once you have a basic understanding of how this works, you will have a better understanding of why the privacy aspect of Tor is good, how you get some level of anonymity with it, and some of the pros and cons that come with using Tor. So let's go through nested encryption first. And by nested encryption, really all that is a way to say that your connection has multiple layers of encryption. It's called onion routing. Think of it like as each layer of encryption goes away, you're peeling an onion back. That's what it looks like here. So here's a quick overview of how this works. You want to connect to, let's say, DuckDuckGo ClearNet. You have to go through 3 nodes on Tor in order to be able to do that. You have 3 layers of encryption. The way this works is when you open up Tor browser, you go to let's say you want to go to DuckDuckGo. From your computer to the first relay, this first layer of encryption gets stripped off at the what's called the entry node or the guard node. And don't sweat too much. We're going to go through that over here. We're going to go through the nodes in more detail. But that guard node strips off that first layer of encryption, and then it knows where to send that traffic to next, which is the middle relay. When it gets to the middle relay, the second layer of encryption gets removed. Then the middle relay sends it to the exit node. Then the exit node sends that traffic to whatever the destination is. Now, I put HTTPS/plaintext here for a reason. It's important that if you're going to use Tor, that you always use HTTPS. If you've been around for a while, there used to be the EFF extension for browsers called HTTPS everywhere. Most websites have this now. I once in a great blue moon come across a website that does not have HTTPS for whatever reason, or maybe you try to load a website with HTTPS, but for some reason there's an issue with the certificate and the website wants to load plain text. I would not recommend doing that. You are welcome to do it if you would like. Just understand that any website you go to that is plain text, whatever it is you're looking at can be seen by the exit node operator. That is why I say always use HTTPS. For example, you would not want to log into any account without HTTPS. Now that we have gone through the basics of nested encryption, let's get into how this works at a deeper level so this makes more sense. The client here is you. Let's just say you are running a desktop computer, it could be Windows or Linux or Apple, whatever. There's 2 different ways that you can start this out. Let me go through the first option over here, which is if you are just using Tor out of the box without changing any settings. Data gets encrypted in 3 layers, which is what I just was covering. This is your entry/guard node. You can refer to it as either one. This first hop will see your IP address, but it will not see the IP address of the website that you want to visit. Now, there is an option to use something called bridges. I'm going to cover bridges in more depth. Basically, what it is a way to obfuscate your traffic. Let's say you live in a country where there's heavy censorship, or maybe you have some sort of concern with your safety, whatever. Let's say your threat model calls for using a Tor bridge, then you can do that. The bridge node is an unlisted entry point. That is your first hop when, let's say, your entry guard is blocked. So again, it sees your IP address, but not the destination. Again, we'll get into bridges more here in just a little bit, and I will show you how to enable these inside of the Tor browser. So, decrypts the outer layer, sends double encrypted data. So now we've moved from triple encryption to double. Middle node, this hop cannot see your IP address, nor can it see the destination IP address. Decrypts the middle layer, sends the single layer of encrypted data to the exit node. This sees the destination, but not the client's IP address, not your IP address. It decrypts that layer. It sends the plain text or end-to-end encrypted traffic if using HTTPS, and then you are at your destination, for example, a website. At its core, this is how Tor works. I'm going to get in more into the encryption stuff here in just a little bit. We're going to get into some more of the details. But before we move on with this topic, anyone that has looked this up a little bit before has probably come across discussions of intelligence agencies, CIA or NSA, GCHQ. Well, do they have the ability to see my traffic? Will they operate nodes? Let's cover some of that real quick. In my last video, when I was talking about the basics of OPSEC for home users, I pulled up this slide here, which said Tor stinks, but it could be worse. Critical mass of targets use Tor. Scaring them away from Tor might be counterproductive. We can increase our success rate and provide more client IPs for individual Tor users. This is a top secret document, or a slide deck rather, that was released to the Five Eyes. You can see release Five Eyes up here. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. A group of intelligence agencies, they all share data. Then you have the 9 Eyes and the 14 Eyes. They also had this down here as well, which is talking about, in this slide deck, they were also talking about how the GCHQ was setting up Tor exit relays specifically. The other thing to mention here is GCHQ QFD. I can't remember what this stands for. It's some kind of a database that GCHQ built where they could figure out who Tor users were when they were not using Tor. They were doing that through different methods, cookies. There's 23 slides to this. There is a GCHQ top secret. It's, if you guys wanted to really look for this stuff, you could find it. I would recommend being careful what it is that you're searching for, what you're looking for. One of the things that was listed on the top secret GCHQ slide deck where they were talking about QFD and how this worked is some of the specific things that they looked for is they build out profiles of websites that people visit. One of the things that they mentioned specifically was suspicious websites, meaning that, yes, it's well known. You can go find this. It's out there. If you go to certain websites, you get tracked by these intelligence agencies across the internet. They track you as best they can. To an extent, you get some level of protection from that with Tor, but just assume that just about everything that you do these days is probably being monitored somehow. It's part of the reason that I'm making this series of privacy videos for home users, so people can start getting more of an understanding of how this stuff works and how they can, to some extent, protect themselves. So let's go to a couple, I'm just going to pull up a couple of threads here that are relevant to our discussion here. This guy's talking about federal agencies operating exit nodes, and this is a counter that I see people come up with when it comes to Tor. The Western governments run most of the exits is one of those things everybody knows but rarely backs up. The list of all relays is public by design. There's contact information attached to relays. The big operators are known individuals and organizations. They contribute, interact. There is some level of truth to this, but I think that this is to some extent a cope that, well, I don't know if this is a thing with some Tor users that they don't want to admit that there is a risk of governments unmasking people who use Tor. It's very clear that these intelligence agencies, when all this stuff was found out, that yes, they do in fact have Tor nodes. Yes, every once in a while they de-anonymize people and arrest people for activities that they are doing on Tor. And the thing that I would implore people to think about with this, that question this, and oh, well, they're all public knowledge, they have contact information. Yes, but these are intelligence agencies who have deep pockets, tons of money. It's nothing for them to set up shell companies to make it look like they are doing things that are legitimate and have these well thought out covers. I'm not saying this to dissuade people from using Tor. It's just that we need to look at this from a realistic perspective. The other thing is this, guys. So let's jump over to this. The majority of Tor nodes are in the 14 Eyes surveillance countries. 14 Eyes, this is expanded: France, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden. I don't remember who all the other countries are, but again, it's 14 of them. These are some of the best intelligence agencies in the world. They all share data with each other. Now, there's a discussion here that, well, should we use Tor? If federal agencies have all these exit nodes, should we use it? In my opinion, and in the opinion of plenty of other people who use Tor, yes, you should still use it. The more people that use it, the better your privacy, and your anonymity is also improved. Nothing's ever 100% anonymous, nor 100% private or secure, but your privacy does improve the more people that use Tor. This is not to scare you away. This is just, I wanted to throw this out there to cover that aspect, because some people might think that, well, should I use it? Yes. Now, if you were wondering, why should I use Tor over a VPN? I mixed some pros and cons. These are all kind of mixed together, but let's go through a list of reasons. In my opinion, and I'm going to make the case here shortly, that you should use Tor and a VPN, but let's just cover it for those that might not be familiar. Again, this is an intro, so I want to cover this stuff. With VPN, your payment method can be tracked. Now, there are some VPN providers that are out there. The only three that I recommend currently are Proton, IVPN, and Mullvad. IVPN and Mullvad you can pay with Monero. I think Monero is an amazing privacy coin. I am going to do, as part of this privacy video series that I'm making, I'm going to be talking about Monero in depth later on. But for the time being, that is absolutely the one that I recommend if you can use it. Proton said that they plan to implement this by the end of 2025. We've got basically 2 months left for them to get this done. As long as you can pay with Monero, you are generally good, as long as you follow good OPSEC measures when you are using Monero. There are a couple of pitfalls with Monero, but mostly it's a great coin. Cryptocurrency as far as privacy goes. Generally, you do not want to use a VPN. Whether you're using it with Tor or on its own, it's generally a good idea to use one that is not forcing you to use a credit card or debit card or PayPal or something like that. Again, a privacy-focused cryptocurrency is best. VPNs are faster. I've done a lot of testing with the Proton IVPN, Mullvad. They don't run as fast as my internet does without a VPN, but they are pretty close. Works well. Thing with Tor, it's pretty slow. People are doing this stuff for free. They're giving away their bandwidth for free. They're setting up Tor nodes. VPNs are always going to be faster. The thing with VPNs, someone still knows who you are and where you're going. So there is some nuance to this. Let's say you connect to a VPN, either any of those three that I just mentioned. The VPN provider knows your real IP address, and they know the destination of the website that you are going to. This could be logged as well. It was one of the, actually, I think it was a few VPNs. This was about 10 years ago when the VPN craze really started taking off. There were some VPN providers that got caught logging information. They handed it over to authorities, basically ratted out their customers, which, here's the thing, don't do anything illegal with VPNs. You'll still get found out anyway. Just saying. But anyway, the problem with VPNs is that if you're using just a single server, they know your real IP address, they know your destination. What I have here in parentheses is double hop implementation can change this. Now, you have to place a lot of trust in your provider. Again, one of those three are great. They've proven themselves to be reliable. The other thing is this does slow your bandwidth down a lot. But as long as double hop is implemented well with these providers, Proton, IVPN, and Mullvad all do this with their double hop implementation. It works similar to the nested encryption over here. But let's just get rid of layer 1. Let's say this is your first VPN connection, your first VPN server, and your second VPN server, your multi-hop. So this layer can see your IP address. It knows where to send the traffic to for the second VPN server. The second VPN server knows the destination IP address, but not your real IP address. I personally wouldn't place as much faith in this as I would in the Tor system, but these VPN providers are all good. They've all had audits done. I think all of them get audited yearly, or at least once every 2 years. I know for sure all 3 of them have been audited by trustworthy auditing teams, whether it's Secure53 or Securitum. Multiple companies out there that do that, but that is something that you can do. This is also going to be relevant here shortly when we talk about using a VPN and Tor together. Generally, you'll get better access to the ClearNet. What I mean is websites generally tend to work better. Every once in a while, I have an issue with a website when I'm using a VPN. It's much more often that I have issues getting websites to load when I use Tor to connect to them. VPNs are also good for public Wi-Fi usage. So unless you are going to use something like, let's say, Unix, or depending on how you set up your computer, you could set up to route all of your traffic through Tor. But if you're just using the Tor browser, let's say you want to connect to public Wi-Fi and you are using a Windows laptop, you would not want to connect to public Wi-Fi with just Tor, because all of your other connections are still going to be going over public Wi-Fi. It's better to have a VPN. If you're going to use someone else's network, I always recommend having a VPN running. You also have ways to obfuscate your traffic. For example, V2Ray is a specific technology that you could go look up if you want to, that helps obfuscate your traffic to make it look like you are not using a VPN. You can also firewall all of your traffic. This can be useful. So there's a couple different ways that you can generally firewall. All 3 of the VPNs, again, that I've listed have a couple different options. You can either set it so the kill switch will cut the internet if it drops, and you can just set that. Let me just pull up my VPN here real quick. And what you'll notice with these is that it will say you can automatically disconnect, or you can do the extra security version where it sets this up at the kernel level. So when you start your computer up, until it connects to a VPN, you cannot use the internet at all. I do like that firewall option, being able to block traffic from leaving. There's also something called split tunneling. This can add some useful utility during your daily driving. Let's say you want to just keep one browser. Let's say you've got 5 browsers, but you just want to keep one that you can log into your Gmail or your Amazon account or your PayPal account or all of this other stuff. And you don't want to deal with CAPTCHAs or potential fraud alerts on your accounts and then have issues where you got to call up customer support to get your account unblocked. You can split tunnel that through your VPN, where anything that gets split tunneled then is through the ClearNet rather than your VPN, or rather it's through your real IP address rather than through your VPN. I personally haven't had really any issues with this myself. It seems like companies and just websites in general have got a lot better about VPNs, but that could still be an issue for some people. Now, let's cover Tor. Tor, unlike a VPN, is free. You do get better anonymity. I did say nothing's ever 100%. Better encryption. You get 3 layers of encryption versus 1 layer or 2 if you do double hop. It is slow. Tor is way slower than VPN. And if you're going to use bridges, which is the method that you can use to obfuscate your traffic, it is painfully slow. Personally, from my own testing, I have not found an option of running bridges that does not slow the traffic to, in my opinion, an almost unusable amount of bandwidth. It's just intolerably slow for me. I've got used to having fast internet, but if you just use Tor on its own without bridges, it works a lot better. But that option is there for the people that need it. You do have more obfuscation methods than VPN. We'll get into bridges here shortly. The other issue that you will occasionally run into with Tor, I haven't noticed this a lot. You'll notice way more websites will give you CAPTCHAs. These are super annoying. having to deal with. But every once in a while, you will also come across websites where you have an infinite CAPTCHA loop. You will solve it correctly, but then it just refreshes and it makes you do it again. The other thing with Tor, you do get the onion network, meaning that you can connect to the .onion. It's like a long randomized string of characters, letters, and numbers. .onion. So like DuckDuckGo, for example, we'll look at that soon. They have their own onion website, which you do not have to worry about the exit node concern that we talked about over here, where it sees the destination, because everything is done within the Tor network. That's not a concern when you're browsing around inside the onion network. I've already mentioned this, but this is just a reminder about the exit nodes and entry nodes and IP addresses. It is a steeper learning curve, but here's one of the things that I really like about Tor. I've been using it for however many years at this point. It's been quite a while. But one of the things with Tor, if you spend the time to really familiarize yourself with how it works, if you familiarize yourself with what goes on underneath the system, you will learn much better OPSEC, because you're going to learn in a somewhat deeper fashion how networking works. If you have to have some level of networking knowledge to understand how to properly stay private when you're browsing around online. I'm going to make a network security video at some point. We'll go over to the intro. We'll do the basics. I'll cover all of that stuff. But as you learn how these systems work underneath the surface, you could open up Tor browser and just use it, and you get the benefits from that. But if you understand how it works at its core, you'll gain a lot of benefits from that, not just knowing how Tor works so you can make it work for you better, but it's also understanding privacy as a whole better. Now, let's talk about Tor over VPN, because first I'll mention this. This has been a hotly debated topic. Should you run Tor over VPN or VPN over Tor? There are security and privacy concerns. Some people said it. There is at least for a while, this was a thing years back when VPNs were really starting to become a hot topic and people were wondering, well, should I connect to a VPN and then use Tor? And there's a large part of the privacy community said, no, that can hurt your privacy by doing that. We have made it far enough in, there's been enough people that have used this, tested this. The general consensus now is, and I've been doing this for, I would say 2 or 3 years now. I have been running Tor over VPN. This seems to generally be accepted. Seems like most people think this is a good idea. The reason being, as long as you are using a good VPN provider, not some generic crap that you just get from some advertisement, one of those three, again, that I mentioned earlier, let's say you pay for it with, say, Monero, the ISP does not know you are using Tor, and your real IP address is not known to the guard node. Now, the VPN knows that you are using Tor and your ISP knows that you are using a VPN. I don't see any problem with that. You got to still be able to use the internet somehow. VPN over Tor should always be avoided, because let's work through this. So if you use Tor to connect to a VPN to then browse the internet, your ISP does know that you use Tor, and the guard node is going to know your real IP address. In my opinion, it kind of defeats the purpose. Why would you use VPN over Tor? Just seems pointless. You're not getting any benefits. It's just, it's garbage. You're going to slow your internet down a lot for basically nothing. As far as what I was talking about earlier with double hop, so I was talking about double hop and using Tor. Here is one scenario where you could use this. Let's say you are connecting to Mulvad and you do double hop VPN connection, and then you connect to Tor. So the way this should work, at least in theory, is that you connect to Mulvad, the first server, it knows your IP address. Traffic goes to the second server, but the second server does not know your IP address. It only knows the exit IP address, which would be the Tor guard node. And then things just continue from there, like I had covered over here. That would be, I would say, the best case scenario for privacy and security if you're going to use VPN and Tor together. Just know that it is really going to slow your connection down if you do that. But overall, it still does work fine. It's just going to take websites a while to load. I know decentralized VPNs are becoming a more of a discussion point. The reason that I'm not bringing these up right now, I have had people in the community recommend things like NIM VPN. I think that's probably, from the VPNs I've researched, I would say NIM VPN is the forefront of decentralized VPNs that I would be willing to recommend. I did quite a bit of looking into the project, and for the time being, I am personally not going to recommend it. There are some things that they need to work on to get it to where I would recommend it. But they are making progress, and I do think that it will eventually be a viable option. But for the time being, that's why I did not include decentralized VPNs in all of this, because with the decentralized VPN, in theory, you could get the benefits of both VPN and Tor without much of the cons that each of them have. But again, there's still some work that needs to be done there. Now, let's go to, let's say you want to define what countries the nodes that you are connecting to. Now, if you go to your Tor folder and you type this into the search bar, TORCC, you can edit this file and you can change. So for example, you could change just the entry nodes, or you could change the entry in the middle nodes, or you could just change the exit in the entry nodes, whatever you wanted to do. In this case, if you followed what I have written down here, don't put in default countries. It's just this right here. I'll explain this. Entry nodes, US, middle nodes, Canada, exit nodes, Australia. You can change what nodes that are in countries that you want to connect to. So for example, you could change the entry nodes to be Switzerland. You could change the exit nodes to be Iceland, for example. Two countries that generally I would say are better for privacy than anything that's Five Eyes. Now, if you put just these three lines in there, if for some reason there's an issue making this connection with all these nodes, it will fall back to default settings and it will just choose another country. If you put strict nodes 1 in there, it will enforce that and it will not allow it to fall back to the default method. So then it would force this specific configuration, or whichever one that you wanted to choose. I know some people want to do that. I personally don't think it's a great idea. I do think that it could open people up to being tracked easier. Let's say you do actually have a concern through your threat model that you could be tracked. I don't think it's necessarily a great idea to do this, but it is an option if you wanted to define what countries you wanted to have for your entry nodes, or what countries you wanted to have for your exit nodes. It is an option. We're going to come back to this stuff down here in a little bit. Let's go through a couple of attacks here that can be used against Tor that you should know about. There are two primary attacks that are pretty well known with using Tor for people that have used it for a while, or if you're new to it. The first one is correlation attacks. This is where an entry and exit node is operated by an attacker. So in this case, if you are concerned, your threat model calls for protecting yourself against nation state actors. This would mean that, let's say the NSA is operating both the entry and the exit node. There's a level of statistics and probability that has to be applied in order for that to happen. It's pretty damn rare that something like that is going to happen, but it is a possibility nonetheless. The other thing is the amount of data going back and forth can reveal that it is you specifically who is using the website. So if we take, and I've got this, we're going to go through this down here because that'll make more sense. And then timing attacks can be used in combination with correlation attacks to monitor when the packets are entering the guard and the exit node and vice versa. So let's go to this, I guess you could call it a flow chart so it makes more sense. The client here is you. That's your computer. Let's say this is you using a Linux desktop with a Tor browser. This is the guard or the entry relay. Now, the reason I put adversary over here, they're monitoring the entry. Let's say, for example, this is just the NSA. I put them separately because you are still connecting Tor to a Tor guard relay, but the NSA, in this case, let's say they're the adversary. Then you have your middle relay. Middle relay doesn't really mean a whole lot. I could be wrong. I doubt this is really operated all that much by intelligence agencies. Guard relays and exit relays are where they can get the most bang for the buck. Maybe you could run into that with middle relay, but that's really not the primary concern. Then you have your exit relay. Let's say again that it is the NSA. We'll keep this simple. Let's say that it is the NSA and they are monitoring all of the traffic on the exit node. So let's follow this here to try to simplify correlation and timing attacks so you can make more sense of how this goes. So your adversary here, the NSA, they're operating the guard relay. They're monitoring incoming traffic and they're looking at the IPs that are connecting to that guard relay. So let's say you're attempting to go to a website. T equals 0. These are just arbitrary numbers. I'm just using basic examples here. Didn't want to get too lost in the sauce here, but your real IP address is known here to this NSA relay. Then it goes your first encryption forward, T equals 0.1. So your time is going up that you're making these connections. Let's say 0.1 seconds. Then it goes to so we've gone from the guard relay to the middle relay to the exit relay. Let's say it's 0.2 seconds. And then we have our connection to the website at 0.3 seconds. So we're following this 100 bytes and we're following this time here. So timing and correlation attacks. So 100 bytes let's say, is being sent. Real IP is known to the guard node. Over here at the exit node, it is still 100 bytes and we're following at 0.3 seconds for time. So a timing attack is where these guys have lots of infrastructure. They collect all this data. This is how they can figure this out. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of data collection that goes into this. But the assumption here is being operated under that if let's say the NSA knows that, okay, it takes this much time for the client to connect to the guard relay. It takes this much time for the guard relay to connect to the middle relay. And then it takes this much time for the middle relay to connect to the exit relay, and then the exit relay to connect to the website. If they have a reasonable understanding of the time that it takes to go through these different nodes, that can allow them to establish a time frame that, hey, we've got 100 bytes coming from this person over here that we are monitoring. That 100 bytes comes out over here to this other relay that we are running, but they can stitch together and reasonably assume that, okay, we're following our timelines here that we estimate, and we have reasonably calculated that this is true, that it would take this long to reach this website, and that it happens to be this 100 bytes. Now, oversimplification here. There are things that you can do. You can send things like dummy packets that pad out the amount of data. Again, I'm just keeping this really simple explanation. So correlation attack, you're matching patterns, so timing and size, to link users to the websites they visit. Now, that website sends a response. We are now time 0.4 seconds. Size is 1 kilobytes. Goes to the middle relay. We're now 0.5 seconds, 0.6 seconds, and now it goes back to the client at 0.7 seconds. So they can use these methods to potentially unmask people who use Tor. Again, this takes a lot of work for them to be able to do this, but it does happen. Sooner or later, a person could end up in a scenario where they're visiting, let's say, a website, and they're going through the entry and exit node that are operated by intelligence agencies. That is something to be aware of. Let's cover some final things here, and then we're going to open up the Tor browser and go through some configuration settings on there. So fingerprinting is one of the most insidious ways that people are being tracked online. If you are new to fingerprinting and you don't know what it is, there's a few different websites. I think one of them is amiunique.org that you can go to, and it will tell you how unique you are compared to other users of that web browser. So you have people who use Chrome. So you can run this test on Chrome or Firefox or Brave or the Tor browser. You're going to get different results depending on which browser you use, because some browsers have better fingerprinting protection than others. If you don't know what fingerprinting is, it is you could think of it as a fingerprint of your computer and your browser that, similar to fingerprints in real life, can be used to identify you on websites that you visit. So let's say you are running a monitor that is 2560 by 1440. You are running Windows 11. You have an AMD graphics cards. You have half a dozen custom fonts installed on your computer. These are examples of things that are all collected as part of a fingerprint. Now, one thing to add about this, so let's take the Tor browser as an example. If you're going to use the Tor browser, keep it as is. Do not use extensions. Given how many different apps are in browser stores these days, let's say you just install 20 random extensions because for some reason, let's say you love extensions in your browser. But let's say you install those in your Tor browser and you are then connecting to different websites. Well, given how many different browsers there are, using statistics and probability, the chance of anyone else having those exact same 20 extensions as you is almost likely going to be zero. You are likely going to be the only person in the world with that version of Firefox or with that Tor browser or with Brave browser that has those 20 extensions. That gives you a unique fingerprint. So let's say you are browsing here's how this fingerprinting can work. Let's say you are browsing ClearNet. You are logging into your Gmail and you log into your Facebook account through ClearNet, and then you decide one day, oh, well, I want to use a VPN instead, and you use that browser with those 20 extensions. And you go to Google and you're doing Google search for news, and you think that Google doesn't actually know who you are. Well, they already have your fingerprint. They already know that it's you because that fingerprint is unique. This is why you have to be careful about things that you're adding to your browser, things that you're changing around. And this is especially important with Tor. I will get into settings here shortly. But that is something to be aware of, is fingerprinting is difficult to deal with because there are so many ways that you can be fingerprinted, and it is impossible to 100% block this stuff. It is annoying from a privacy perspective. There are privacy improvements that are being made, but it seems like it's this cat and mouse game that we have to play with data collection, whether it's for advertising or some nefarious purpose. But we can cover that more later. Let's move on. Operating system selection is going to have a pretty big impact on the overall privacy aspects of using Tor. If you are going to use Windows, especially unbloated Windows, especially bloated Windows, but even if you use unbloated Windows, let's say you're using Simple Wall to block a bunch of the Windows telemetry, you are using a closed source operating system that is known to collect tons of data on people. If you want to use Tor, but you're using Windows, that's fine. You can do that. You still will gain something. Privacy is not an all or nothing. It is a series of steps that people choose to climb. Maybe instead of going all the way up here, you decide you want to go up one step at a time, or maybe you get a couple steps up and you decide, hey, I just want to stay here in my privacy journey. It's up to you. But you're not going to get the maximum benefits of Tor when you're using a operating system like Windows that collects all of the data on everything that you do inside of your operating system. If you run a firewall in Windows, you will see the level of data collection that Microsoft collects. If you run a firewall like Simple Wall, which blocks everything by default that you have to allow, you open up Control Panel, you will notice a request connection for systemsettings.exe, because any settings that you change on Windows, that gets phoned home to Microsoft because they collect data on that. They collect data on everything that happens inside of Windows. So that is something you need to consider if you're really serious about privacy and you have a need for a lot of privacy, something to be aware of if you are going to be using Tor. Running relays does come with significant risk. I should have prefaced this with exit relays. This isn't really super relevant to the video, but if you are getting kind of introduced to Tor and you think, well, I want to use Tor and for whatever reason, and I really like it, I want to support the community. Just know, if you run an exit node, it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when you have the police, potentially the FBI, show up at your door. You are very likely going to have to deal with threats of your ISP shutting your internet down, or they may just shut your internet down for good because that exit node has your IP address attached to it whenever somebody is using it to connect to something that is illegal. There has been the people that operate exit nodes have had to deal with a lot of crap to keep this going. I am glad that there are people that do it. I would not be willing to do it personally, but if you are going to run a node, just understand there is a lot of risk with running an exit node. Use caution if you're in a restrictive jurisdiction. I covered this in the last video, the OPSEC, the intro to OPSEC for home users. If you're going to use a VPN, for example, you have to be careful in countries like the United Arab Emirates. I think India just banned VPNs. The UK is talking about potentially banning VPNs. If you connect to VPN or you connect to Tor and you are in a country that is illegal to do that, as soon as you connect to it, you are risking police coming to your door and arresting you, whether you are traveling there and you are from out of country or you live in that country. Now, this is why there are obfuscation methods that exist, which again, we'll get into, but like bridges or V2Ray in the case of VPNs, there are these obfuscation methods that exist, but again, just use caution if you are going to do that. The other thing is you can use proxies. For example, you may have at some point heard people using Tor with a SOCKS 5 proxy. My recommendation would be to stick to Tor over VPN or use bridges, but that is something you could do for the sake of keeping it simple. Again, we're focusing on intro to home users here. We're not trying to get into a 5-6 hour technical deep dive here. This is something you can do, but it's not something that I was going to cover for the video because it kind of would have started going out of the scope of what we were covering. That said, let's go ahead and get started with, we'll go ahead and select our Tor browser here, and we'll start going through some settings. When you install Tor and you open it up for the first time, this is how it's going to look. You do not have internet access. If you go and open up a separate tab here and you try to enter something in and you try to go to a website, it will not connect. You have to connect first. So you can either manually connect or you can set it to always connect automatically. As long as you are not in a high risk situation where you need to always double check your connection, you should be fine to just have it connect automatically. You could just toggle this on. One thing that I will make note of when you open up Tor browser, always. So let's say you are opening up Firefox and let's say you have your browser windows, they open up at different sizes. You close it out and then you open it back up. It will be at that resolution generally. In some cases, it doesn't work that way, but generally, let's say you have it like this. Let's say you have two windows side by side, but then you open them up again later. You close it out and open it up again later. They will open up in that same size. With Tor, that is not the case. Let me close out of this. We will open Tor back up. Now, I believe Tor always defaults to 1000 by 1000 pixels. I could be wrong on that, but it does that for fingerprinting protection. Now, one of the things is if you go to miunique.org, let's say you do this on Firefox, for example, and you have your web browser full size and you run that test, it will tell you what the aspect ratio is or what the size of your browser window is. If you then shrink the size of the window down and run the test again, it changes. That changes your fingerprint anytime you do that. Now, Tor does have letterboxing protection. Let's go ahead and open this up here. Let's go up to general. We'll start going through some settings here. They do have something called letterbox protection, which should help protect against that fingerprinting. One of the things that you'll notice is as you go to websites, let's actually go to a website right now. Let's go ahead and open up DuckDuckGo. So as I resize this window here, you can see that when it was at 1000 by 1000, it was right here. And as you start expanding it, you have a letterbox that shows up here. Now, in theory, Tor should be able to protect against that level, that fingerprinting that I was talking about as you resize your windows. I would not rely on that. Now, this is being ultra paranoid. Of course, you can resize your Tor windows. If your threat model is so restrictive that you could be identified and potentially have something bad happen to you as a result of you resizing your Tor browser window, the level of protection that you need is way beyond what these videos are designed for. And you really need to evaluate your threat model and figure out something else there. I am not saying that you should not just full size your browser window. I'm just explaining this as one of the options or one of the things that you will notice with Tor. Let's go through some settings. I'm actually going to zoom this in here. Now, I mentioned that ideally you want to keep everything exactly as is because that keeps your fingerprint the same as all of the other Tor users, except for the people who decide to start installing extensions. So that means keep this default, keep this default. One thing you could change, by default, it will have DuckDuckGo. I recommend DuckDuckGo, the .onion, basically the onionized version of DuckDuckGo. You're keeping everything within the Tor network. Privacy and security, it's good to keep all of this stuff as is. Always use private browsing mode. Every time you close out, it will delete stuff. One thing you can change on here that it's up to you if you want to do it. For the sake of fingerprinting, it's fine. You can change this stuff. Standard is where things are at currently. Now, one thing I don't think I mentioned earlier, the Tor browser does not come with an ad blocker. Now, if you have something like the Pi-hole, that is a way that maybe you could block ads through that, but you cannot just do that through Tor. You could install uBlock Origin, but I do not recommend it, again, for the reason of fingerprinting. If you're not super concerned with fingerprinting, you could install it. I'm sure there are a fair amount of Tor users who have uBlock Origin installed, so you would blend in with them as long as you're all using just that one extension. Because one of the issues with Tor is you will see ads, unfortunately. You can change it, so if you go to safer, JavaScript is disabled on non-HTTPS websites. The thing with JavaScript is malvertising is something you could go look up on your own time. I don't want to get into it in this video. Malvertising, drive-by downloads, those are able to spread malware to people's computers just from clicking on a bad link or visiting a bad website. JavaScript is used to spread malware. Unfortunately, the bad guys are able to exploit this stuff and they can spread it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use JavaScript. If you disable it, it's going to break a lot of websites. You could click Safer and get some extra level of protection. You do have the option of using Safest. Just know that if you do this, there's going to be a lot of websites that either are broken to an extent that they're going to look like crap and you might have some usability issues with them, or they refuse to load entirely. This is an option you can change. Standard works just fine as long as you have other good security practices, you're using good common sense, shouldn't really be an issue. Enable HTTPS only mode in all windows. You should, again, never visit a website without HTTPS. This is your always connect automatically. If you change your mind, you come in here and turn it off. Use bridges. This is the obfuscation methods that I covered at the start of the video. If you are in a position where you need to use this, or let's say you just want to use this, again, it's going to slow your traffic down a lot. So if you don't have to use this, I wouldn't recommend it. You could enable this, and then you can select these built-in bridges. So you have OBFS4, make your Tor traffic look like random data, may not work in heavily censored regions. Snowflake, routes your connection through Snowflake proxies to make it look like you are placing a video call, for example. Or Meek Azure. For those that are not familiar, Azure is Microsoft's version of AWS, Amazon Web Services. Makes it look like you're connected to a Microsoft website instead of using Tor. May work in heavily censored regions, but is usually very slow. Again, I don't recommend using this if you don't have a need for it, but it is up to you. And then you can also find more bridges, stuff that's not public if you want to. Here, then you have some advanced settings. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. The one last thing that I'll cover, Tor does by default have no script. This is a good extension to have because it can block some malware, cross-scripting attacks, things like that through there. But at a high-level overview, this is how Tor works for home users. I hope you got a lot of value out of this video. If you did, I've got plenty of in-depth tutorials that are coming up. The Whonix video should be next. That may take a couple of weeks, so please be patient with that. And if you are busy with your career and you have a need for privacy and you don't want to go through setting up all this on your own, and you want to have all of this set up for you automatically, and you want me to just come in and do it, I will leave a link down in the description for info on consulting. With that said, I appreciate the support as always, and I'll see you in the next video.